Isabella Stewart Gardner, born in 1840 and died in 1924, created a private, obsessive world of art and eccentric hospitality, then opened it to the public in 1903. The museum at 25 Evans Way in Boston's Fenway was designed by architect Willard T. Sears to resemble a Venetian palazzo, with a cloistered central courtyard and rooms arranged like parlors in a private house. Gardner collected with a bloodless, relentless eye Rembrandt van Rijn, Johannes Vermeer, Edouard Manet, Edgar Degas, John Singer Sargent, and medieval armor all rubbed shoulders in a voyeuristic theatrical layout she curated herself. The most notorious prizes were hung where any visitor could stand inches away. Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, painted in 1633, a roiling, violent seascape, and Vermeer's The Concert, circa 1660 to 1661, an intimate interior whose silence felt fragile. Gardner's will codified that fragility. Her bequest required the collection to remain exactly as she arranged it, a mausoleum-like injunction that froze rooms in time. The building's intimacy, low ceilings, narrow corridors, interconnected galleries opening directly off the courtyard, made the art feel domestic and exposed rather than aloof and protected behind pedestals. For decades, the museum ran a lean, almost genteel approach to security. Small staffs, night watchmen making rounds, an alarm system that was more procedural than paranoid, and by 1990, no closed-circuit camera network watching the galleries. The physical environment amplified those administrative compromises. Frames hung within arm's reach, doors that opened to the street, shadowed alcoves that swallowed movement. That combination, an eccentric founder who forbade rearrangement, a compact, house-like plan that prioritized atmosphere over fortress logic, and limited antiseptic overnight protection, turned the Gardner from a beloved salon into a brittle, tempting target. The stage was set, its corridors humming with a patient, macabre possibility, waiting for the cold, efficient act that would test every brittle assumption. On the night of March 18, 1990, a Sunday, two men posing as Boston police officers turned the intimate domestic rhythm of 25 Evans Way, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, into a macabre crime scene. They arrived after midnight, walked past the cloistered courtyard into galleries hung with paintings, some positioned just inches above the floor, and spoke calmly enough to convince the night staff they were responding to a disturbance. The two night guards on duty complied. The men produced badges and wore uniforms that passed the brief scrutiny of a public institution that still trusted civility more than suspicion. Once inside the cloistered galleries, they shifted from polite to predatory, ordering the guards to the ground, restraining them with plastic ties and tape, and bundling them into a service corridor and down a basement stairwell where they were left immobilized and silenced. That practiced performance had no official name that night, only a routine of deception that turned the museum's dim, house-like plan into a bloodless trap. For roughly 81 minutes, the imposters moved through Gardner's theatrical parlors like executioners working a checklist. Maybe clicking subscribe would have saved them. They were surgical and efficient. Canvases were cut free from their frames, paintings were lifted off walls, and small objects and decorative pieces were pried loose and carried away. 13 works of art vanished, including Rembrandt van Rijn's tumultuous The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, 1633, and Johannes Vermeer's intimate The Concert, circa 1660 to 1661. Two pieces that had hung within arm's reach. The thieves ignored pedestals and vitrines when it suited them, and targeted objects displayed like family heirlooms when stealth demanded speed. Staff who later reconstructed the sequence described the thieves as methodical, taking exactly what they wanted and leaving the building as quietly as they had entered. At 1:24 a.m., after the intruders left, the night guards either freed themselves or were found, and they staggered through the galleries to report a nightmare. Frames gaping like empty eye sockets, pedestals stripped bare, the museum gutted of the specific masterpieces Isabella Stewart Gardner had arranged. Alarmed and shaking, The guards and remaining staff immediately called Boston police. Within hours, the FBI was on the scene, beginning a sprawling, grisly investigation that turned the museum into a sealed crime scene and launched a decades-long investigation the city and the nation could not forget. Within hours, the battered galleries at 25 Evans Way were sealed and transformed into a clinical, gruesome crime scene. Boston police and the FBI worked side by side under cold fluorescent lights as director Anne Hawley joined investigators. Agents cataloged the 13 missing works and photographed frames left as empty, gaping sockets. Every shattered expectation of sanctuary was documented with bureaucratic, marrow-deep thoroughness. The museum's limited security proved pitiful. Investigators only had a handful of grainy black and white images from a single surveillance unit and a few still photographs showing two men in Boston police uniforms moving through the cloister, some carrying objects or tugging at frames. Those low-resolution shadowed images were released to the public and splashed across newspapers, the first grisly proof handed to a city and a nation that could not imagine such intimate plunder. Public appeals followed immediately. The museum and law enforcement urged anyone with information to call tip lines, and a multi-million-dollar reward was announced to pry open the sealed mouths of the underground. Forensic teams swept the scene with methodical patience, collecting fibers, tape fragments, microscopic paint chips, and impressions from ladders and shoes. Analysts examined cut marks on stretchers and stretcher bars, adhesive residues, and the way canvases had been severed. Each technical detail became a cold clue to the thieves' tools and tempo. Early lab results produced tantalizing but incomplete leads, trace fibers hinting at clothing types, adhesive patterns matching commercial tape, and a few latent prints so partial they were like fingerprints in fog. Witness accounts multiplied. Neighbors, late-night drivers, and a hospital security guard were interviewed. Some reported a dark vehicle in the Fenway that night. Others remembered nothing but an uncanny silence. Tips poured in for months, sending investigators on smoky tangents from local scrapyards to out-of-state storage facilities and known fences for stolen art. The FBI treated the Gardner case as one of its highest priority property theft investigations, assembling teams to follow leads into New England's murky corners of collectors, gang connections, and private dealers. Despite press briefings, composite sketches based on guard recollections, subpoenas for records, and cross-checks of art market movements, definitive answers remained maddeningly out of reach. The thieves had planned with chilling efficiency and vanished into a market and a city that refused to cough up the missing canvases. The investigation hardened into a long pursuit, split into conflicting leads and bitter disappointments, setting the stage for deeper, darker inquiries to come. The investigation stretched for decades, a raw wound that would not close, swallowing informant tips, alleged mob connections, and hope in equal, grisly measure. In the weeks after March 18, 1990, FBI agents and local detectives chased faint traces. By the 1990s and 2000s, the case threaded through New England crime families, small-time fences, and rumor-soaked bars. Investigators probed the Winter Hill Gang and figures tied to organized crime in Boston, and the name James Whitey Bulger and his Winter Hill associates surfaced repeatedly as a potential link. Suspicions hardened and frayed as men died, went silent, or were otherwise removed from the board. Leads arrived with the speed and rancor of rot. One informant claimed the paintings had been cut into pieces and fed to a furnace. Another swore they were hidden in a basement or buried beneath a garage, and a third said they had been shipped overseas. Each new confession inflamed public hope. Each collapse of a tip left the museum's empty frames yawning like fresh graves. In June 2013, the investigation produced a high-profile arrest. Robert Gentili of Providence was taken into custody and accused of lying to the FBI about what he knew of the heist. Federal search warrants and interviews followed, producing timelines, connections, and rumors, but no resurrection of the missing works. Over time, Key figures either died or retreated into stubborn silence in Whitey Bulger's 2018 death in a West Virginia prison and the passing of other suspects choked off avenues of testimony, turning living memory into a sterile, clenched history. Meanwhile, forensic science reawakened the case. Labs re-examined tape fragments, fibers, microscopic paint chips, and latent prints with DNA techniques and digital databases that did not exist in 1990. Conservators used X-radiography and pigment analysis to map how canvases had been handled and severed. Cold case teams routed hundreds of tips through modern analytics and cross-referenced phone records, car registrations, and shipping manifests with renewed computational rigor. Still, gaps persisted. Partial prints too smudged to lift, fibers that matched common clothing, and testimony that was more personality-driven than evidentiary. Each promising technological advance forced a brutal calculus. New tools could illuminate old traces, but time had turned witnesses into monuments and suspects into shadows. Decades made the case both a forensic experiment and a morgue of leads, setting the stage for a final reckoning that would have to overcome death, silence, and the clinical cunning of men who slipped through a city's veins on a single, violent night. After decades of rumor and ruin, the case sharpened into a public, high-stakes moment in June 2013, when investigators arrested Robert Gentile in Providence on charges of lying to the FBI about contacts related to the March 18, 1990 Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. That arrest triggered a coordinated sweep. Agents searched Gentile's Providence home, storage units, and linked addresses across Rhode Island and Massachusetts. They probed basements, garages, and climate-controlled lockers for the 13 missing works, including Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee and Vermeer's The Concert. The FBI also released enhanced surveillance frames, digitally clarified, color-corrected stills that turned earlier, ghostly negatives into sharper, more disturbing images of two men in Boston police uniforms moving through the museum's cloister. Newsrooms ran the frames like grisly talismans. Public tips surged, and the museum's empty frames were once again presented as open wounds. Forensic teams moved in with renewed tools: DNA reanalysis of tape fragments, fresh checks of adhesive residues, and new comparisons of latent prints against expanded databases. Federal agents executed raids with the deliberate intensity of hunters following old blood. But each search turned up absence: a climate unit with irrelevant crates, a garage with old tires, a storage locker full of antiques and rusted hope. Leads that once hinted at revival collapsed under documentary scrutiny. Paperwork, phone logs, and receipts produced timelines with gaps too large to bridge. The enhanced images concentrated attention and emotion, and the raids dramatized resolve. Yet the outcome was brutal and anticlimactic. Exhaustive searches, public spectacle, and nothing to bring the paintings back from their gaping, mausoleum-like silence. The unresolved ache of that failure has lingered, shaping how the theft is remembered and how the search continues. When the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was robbed on March 18, 1990, the fallout reshaped museums, the art market, and law enforcement. The theft forced sweeping reforms. Museums installed CCTV and motion sensors, reinforced frames, adopted round-the-clock security, tightened access controls, and strengthened inventories, accession records, and provenance research. Climate-controlled storage replaced casual custody, and institutions began treating stewardship as a serious, ongoing responsibility. The art market tightened too. Dealers, auction houses, and collectors now perform rigorous due diligence, consult Interpol and the FBI National Stolen Art File, and flag suspicious transactions. The museum's empty frames remain on the walls as a stark, almost mausoleum-like memorial, an unignorable evidence of loss that enshrines absence. The FBI's sprawling investigation is one of the most notorious art crime cases in U.S. history and helped establish protocols for interagency cooperation, cold case forensic review, and public appeals that continue today. Culturally, the theft changed the public imagination. Books, films, and headlines keep the wound raw, and the guards, museum staff, and the city of Boston still carry a quiet, personal scar. The mystery resists closure, a gaping cavity that keeps people searching and forces a blunt question. How do we protect beauty when absence has become its most potent emblem?